The push to get significant and bipartisan legislation for gun safety on a national level stalled in the Senate late this week over several details.
The framework includes some of the unprecedented laws that were passed in Florida in 2018 after the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Max Schachter was among the parents who pushed through for legislation, and he is pushing for the Alex and Max Safety Act. He testified about it before the Senate Judiciary Committee this week. He joins us now live. Max Schachter, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell us about your experience testifying. We watched you on Wednesday. I thought you were effective. You made your case, but in fact, your proposals for both LASA, as it's known through the acronym, and the Eagles Act didn't go anywhere. What happened?
Well, right after Alex was murdered in the Parkland school shooting, I put my life on hold and have made it my mission to do everything I could to prevent this from happening again. And then I traveled this country to see what school districts were doing well. And what I found was that there are a lot of school districts that are taking school safety seriously. They're prioritizing safety and security, but it's only happening in those school districts, and the rest of the country didn't really know about it. Because if you look, all these educators that signed up to be school educators and work in schools, they are not school security experts. And there really is only one place that I'm aware of that trains teachers in college to be school educators, and that's at the Indian River State College. They have a great program there that teaches teachers on school safety. But as we look around the country, there was really a lack of centralized school safety resources. So I came up with this idea after Parkland to create a federal school safety clearinghouse. And now we have it. It sits inside the Department of Homeland Security, and it's the new federal school safety clearinghouse. I recommend all of your viewers to go to schoolsafety.gov, where all educators, school administrators, and parents can find the best practices on what we need to do to make our schools safe. So there's a lot of great resources, and grant dollars are housed on schoolsafety.gov. So the first bill that I talked about in my testimony was the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, and that codifies the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse and turns it into law. And, this is so important because after the shooting, I was just consumed with grief and anger, because if we look at our history after these really seminal events that we've had in our country, after 9/11, we made the airplane safer. After the Oklahoma City bombings, we made the federal buildings safer. And in 1958, at the Lady of Our Angels church fire, 92 children died in a church fire. And after that, we made fire codes to prevent children from dying in a school fire. And no child has died in a school fire since 1958.
And then there was the Columbine shooting. And as I know you testified, laws about school safety and guns should have changed then, but in fact, they did not.
It's been 23 years, Michael, since Columbine, and our children and our teachers continue to be murdered in our classrooms. And I think one of the reasons is complacency. There are parts of this country that are really taking this seriously, but there are others that aren't. And I think that Broward County, prior to Parkland, would fit in that category. Parkland was named one of the safest cities in the state. It's one of the reasons we moved here. And that is not true. I think we've come a long way. Schools are much safer now than when they were prior to the shooting. But a lot has to change, and the mindset is important. We've got to get away from that mindset that it can't happen here. I never thought it would happen in Parkland. They never thought it would happen in Uvalde or Sandy Hook. And this can happen in any school. That's why it's key that every administrator understands that if your children and their teachers do not come home every day, nothing else matters.
Max, I just want to preface the next question by saying on this Father's Day, we are very grateful that you're here, and we honor you and we remember Alex And I just wanted you to know how profoundly grateful we are for you to be here with us today. As you speak to lawmakers, not only locally, but in D.C., as you did this week, we had Tony Montalto, one of your colleagues and a Parkland dad, was on with us a few weeks ago, talking about these bills like the Luke and Alex Act and like the Eagles Act that he is also behind, and what issues these seemingly very good and bipartisan bills, what issues they're having getting through the legislatures. And his take on it was just extreme from right and left. The extremes are really putting a wrench in what could go forward. Would you comment on that?
I think Tony's spot on. I think that it's been 30 years since we've had any gun safety legislation passed, and it's about time that our elected leaders do something. That's the reason we elected them, is to make our country safer, and bills like the Luke and Alex School Safety Act and the Eagles Act, which reauthorizes the U.S. Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center to focus on school safety, are really key. They're not, controversial bills. They're really common sense pieces of legislation. I know in Congress, common sense really doesn't have a place there, but I think it's right. And we're not talking about infringe upon anybody's rights here. We're just, when you look at the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, it's just a website of best practices and resources. I mean, my God, why isn't that in the gun safety legislation? And when you look at the Eagles Act, the Secret Service uses threat assessments to protect the president. The Capitol Hill Police uses threat assessments to protect members of Congress. Our children deserve the same protection. And so I hope that both of these pieces of legislation will make it into the gun safety new bipartisan bill. But it's about time that they did something for us. And that's the only thing that the 17 Parkland families and the Uvaldes and all of these horrible tragedies, we just don't want our children to die in vain, and something positive to come from all this tragedy.
Yeah, we hear you and agree with you. So hold on, Max Schachter. We have more questions for you. We'll be back in just a minute.
Thank you.
We are back with Parkland dad Max Schachter, Alex's dad, and we are talking to Max on the week that he has testified before a Senate committee as they try to frame out this bipartisan gun legislation. And Max, one of the sticking points, as we understand it, a couple of sticking points, one of which is almost very confusing, and that is the red flag laws that actually was part of the Florida law 4 years ago that has been, by all accounts, very successful in allowing law enforcement to take temporarily weapons away from people who are deemed to be threats to others or themselves. Why, do you have insight on that? Why would that be a sticking point in this larger framework of gun safety?
I'm a big supporter of red flag laws. I'm not sure what's happening in those negotiations, but I think that, if you just look to what Florida has done, we have used our red flag law over 8,000 times. And red flag laws are really an essential tool in their tool belt of what to do when you've got individuals that have uncontrolled anger and are mentally unstable and have access to firearms and are threatening to hurt themselves or others. This is really a critical tool that law enforcement needs. I think that every state should look to what Florida has done. I mean, we made some tremendous changes after the Parkland school shooting, and red flag laws are one of them. But really, what you need to couple red flag laws with an effective threat assessment. And that's where the Eagles Act comes into place. There was a threat assessment done on the Parkland murderer in 2016, Glenna, and the assistant principal that did it completely botched the threat assessment. And I think that if they had done it correctly, Alex and the 16 others would still be here today. The assistant principal had never done one in his 30-year career. He didn't know how to fill out the paperwork, didn't know where it was. And that's why the Eagles Act is so important. The Secret Service does all that training around the country, and I've been there with them. I traveled with them, and their training has been so effective that after receiving that training, schools have actually used that training to prevent attacks on their schools. So I hope that the Eagles Act can be put into place, and that bill can be signed into place, and it can be included in the gun safety legislation. Because once they do that threat assessment, then you've got that red flag law. And I think red flag law should be in every state of the country.
Yeah.
Max, we heard you after you had left the Capitol, or maybe you were still at the Capitol after your testimony, and you were critical of Republicans and Democrats for failing to really move forward on this. One of the Democrats who, in fact, stopped the LASA Act and maybe the Eagles Act was Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And he had said that he did so, quote, because it could see more guns in schools. We need him to explain that, but why would he say that?
Yeah, it was really hurtful that he did that, because it was really disingenuous and factually incorrect that he would say that, we created the Luke and Alex School Safety Act to codify the new federal school safety clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse is just a website of best practices where all the federal agencies that work on school safety, from the Departments of Education, Health and Human Services, Justice, and Homeland Security, all work together to make sure that we've got the right best practices up on schoolsafety.gov. So it doesn't put more guns in schools. It doesn't increase the number of school resource officers. It's just a website that schools and parents can go to. It doesn't mandate anything. There are no requirements. It's just best practices. 60 to 70% of the material on schoolsafety.gov is focused on mental health. So it's really not true at all. It's just a resource website. So I was really hurt by what he said. And, we thought that we had the best chance of getting this passed. This was 2 days after Uvalde, after 19 children and 2 teachers were brutally murdered in their classroom. And you can't pass a website bill. I mean, it's just ridiculous and really, really upsetting.
Max Schachter, best practices, to your point, have no politics, should have no politics. We always appreciate you, and we will keep in touch for sure.
Max, thanks so much. Appreciate it on this Father's Day.